Welcome, everybody. Welcome to History Author Talks. This evening, we've got a terrific show, and I'm very pleased with our guests tonight. Before we get started, I wanted to just go through a few little housekeeping measures. We will be using the chat feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen for your questions for our guests. So as we go through the show, you come up with questions that you want to ask. Certainly use the chat feature. Those questions will come to me, and I will then forward them on to our guest host. I will also be looking for questions that you have, any questions that you have for me directly. Again, those all come to me. If you have to leave the show early, we are recording this program so that you will be able to see this program and all of our other History Author Talks that we have had before when you go to historyauthortalks.com and you look at past shows. So I invite you to do that, certainly, and let your friends know about historyauthortalks.com. So tonight, we are going to have a presentation given by author Norm Desmarais. And Norm will be introduced a little bit later by our guest host, who is Bill Welsh. And we are also joined tonight with Robert Selig. So one of the things that's very interesting about our guest and Robert Selig, who is our partner in history, and our guest host, Bill Welsh, who is the co-founder of the Congress of American Revolutionary War Roundtables and the president and founder of the Richmond Roundtable, is that there's a little publishing story here. Bill Welsh, I've known for a number of years, is one of the most well-read people I know on the American Revolution. And a few years ago, I represented a book on Daniel Morgan, and I was talking with Bill Welsh about Revolutionary War biographies. And I said to Bill, so who do we need a biography of? What's missing in the literature? And Bill said, we really need an updated biography on Louis Duportail. And I had heard the name, read about him in earlier books, but I didn't know that one even existed. So Bill said, but you're going to have to find somebody who can read French. And so I called Bob Selig, who we'll see tonight. And Bob said, oh, well, call Norm Desmarais. He can do this. And I called Norm. I'd never met Norm. I'd called him and I said, is this something that interests you? And he said, yeah, I think I can do that. And I said, all right, well, let me go find you a publisher. And I went and found a publisher. Prometheus is publishing this book. In fact, yesterday it was just shipped yesterday. And I called up Norm and I said, okay, I found a publisher who wants to publish your book. How long do you think it'll take you to get done? And Norm said, oh, I've written it. I just wrote it. So this is the level of knowledge. And I got to tell you, it is fantastic. We'll hear a lot more about the book in just a few minutes. But before we get into that, I would like to first introduce you to our partner in history, who is going to tell us about the Washington Rochambeau Trail. Robert Selig is a noted historian who has been involved in the Washington Rochambeau Trail for many years. And so I'm very pleased to present Bob Selig. Bob, over to you.
Hey, thank you, Roger, for this opportunity to talk a little bit tonight about Washington Rochambeau, because this is a great opportunity and a great event for me to do this because my good friend Norm is going to talk about perfect representations of this cooperation and these contributions of French forces with the Continental Army that are actually the story of the Washington Rochambeau revolutionary route. Duportail as a French volunteer in the Continental Army, and the Comte de Lauberdière as an officer in Rochambeau's expeditionary force. So what is the Washington Rochambeau revolutionary route? It is, as you see on the first slide, it's the story of the movements of the
Slide's
Continental.
not up yet, Bob. You got to,
Not up?
yeah.
Oh, I thought you had, can you
No,
put it up?
I had taken it down, so you got to put it back up again.
Oh, okay. Here we go. Share. Is it on?
There you go.
Okay,
We're good.
very good. Okay, yeah, first slide then. What is the Washington Rochambeau Revolutionary Route, National Historic Trail, other than a mouthful? It is the story, as it says, of the movements of the Continental Army and of French forces from New York and New England to Yorktown and back. In other words, it's not about the siege of Yorktown, it's about getting to Yorktown. It's about getting to Yorktown and on water and on land, and is of the cooperation with and contributions of France in the form of the troops on land, on the water that France sends, and of the citizens of the United States who house and feed and welcome these foreigners. All the contributions to the victory at Yorktown on the 19th of October, 1781, and toward the achievement of American independence. In other words, it's movements on water and on land by thousands of people through what 9 or so of the original states. As you see here, goals and purposes is then, once we have this trail, and we do have this trail, and has been designated by President Obama was in March of 2009, what the goal and the purposes, that's basically this slide basically tells you the answers to the questions that I get a lot when people say, you know, we have a National Historic Trail. What if I want to walk it or bike it or horseback, whatever? What is there for me to see? What is there to see? And the unifying purpose behind of all of this is to identify resources in the states along the route. What is there to see? Develop plans to preserve and interpret those campsites. Very often you look at a campsite, you can tell that 250 years ago, thousands of troops camped on there, surviving road sections. It's amazing how many 18th century road sections are still out there, buildings and other resources, etc. So we have the resources, then we want to look at those with a view toward the campaign of 1781 as a diverse, a cross-cultural experience. Cross-cultural meaning both French American, few Americans had ever seen a Frenchman other than on the other end of a musket barrel during the French and Indian Wars, as well as inter-American, because there are very few people from Massachusetts that ever been down to Virginia and vice versa. Those were new countries for different Americans, for the development of this national American identity, because you know who you are, not just by knowing who you are, but also by finding out who or what you are not. And this National Historic Trail gives you great opportunities for Americans to learn who they are not. They're not French, they're not Virginians, they're not from Maryland, but they're from Massachusetts, but they're all part of a greater United States that's emerging at this point. And contributions of various states, obviously, and the crucial contributions of France. Just one sentence, there were more French soldiers on water and on land than Americans at Yorktown, for example. And then the global character of that war, the war for France and for Britain by 1781. This is almost a sideshow when you look at expenses and troops involved. There are 3 times as many French soldiers outside Gibraltar than there are outside Yorktown. The legislation reads, it's the National Washington-Rochambeau is a corridor. And if you look at this map here of Continental Army troops across New Jersey, for example, on the 29th of August, you see there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different routes, a whole corridor of troops marching, not just across New Jersey, but across the other states too, only coming together at crucial crossing points like crossing the Schuylkill or the Delaware, etc. So it's called the National Historic Trail, but it's much more. It's a corridor 30, 40, 50 miles wide that goes from, from Boston, Newport, Providence, all the way down to Norfolk. And we know that Admiral Barras comes from Newport to Yorktown, while de Grasse comes from the West Indies. So geographically, this is a huge area that's covered with hundreds of miles. If you want to learn more about this, we have a website. We, meaning the Washington Rochambeau Revolutionary Route, the association. Here, this is W3R-US with history sections. There are state reports for the different states that I wrote, timelines, planning your visit, etc. And the National Park Service also has its website here, and the Johnny Carawan, who is the trail administrator, is out in King of Prussia. That's Valley Forge. The executive director, Ellen von Karajan, is located in Baltimore, and you can contact both of them for additional information, or you can also contact me, of course. That's in very broad outlines what this National Historic Trail is all about. And I think Norm is going to tell us now the experiences of one man who rides this National Historic Trail, not just once, but 2 or 3 times, because you all know how the Army works. You are in Newport, you walk to Yorktown to get back to Boston to sail to the West Indies. I mean, that's how it goes. All right, that's all I had. Thank you very much, Roger.
Okay, great. So now what we're going to do now is, and by the way, I put the URL for the Washington Rochambeau Trail on the chat feature. I'm trying to find who we need to mute there. There we go. I put the URL for the Washington Rochambeau Trail on the chat feature. I will also be putting that URL on the website, historyauthortalks.com, with this show when you look at the past shows. So next, I'd like to introduce our guest host, Bill Welsh. And as I mentioned earlier, Bill Welsh is the co-founder of the Congress of American Revolutionary War Roundtables and the president and founder of the Richmond Roundtable. And to start, before you introduce Norm, Bill, I would love to have you tell us a little bit about Revolutionary War Roundtables.
I will be glad to do that. Thank you. Good evening, folks. It's a pleasure to be with you tonight. And certainly I want to thank Roger for asking me to participate. This is going to be certainly an enjoyable evening. A few words about the Congress. Back in 2011, my friend from South Carolina, David Ruhr, and David is very much involved in SCAR, the Southern campaigns of the American Revolution. We thought it would be interesting to get all the current roundtable representatives together to talk about where we stand, as David said, to widen the circle, increase the movement. We wanted to get together to talk about best practices, perhaps vetting speakers, perhaps help roundtables that were getting started. The first Congress met in Richmond. We had about 25 people attend. It was great. We've met 5 times subsequent to that, from South Carolina up through Morristown. And we've had representatives from most of the roundtables. There are currently about 20 roundtables in the country, from Boston down to Georgia. There's a few that are inactive. There's a few that are kind of in nascent stages. Some are coming and going, but there are quite a few of them out there that are running wonderful programs. We're not, that the Congress is not meant to be any kind of a governing body. It is really more of a, and we presume to call it a Congress. It is more of an organization to assist other groups, to assist other members, to, as I said, to help new roundtables that are starting. Every roundtable is autonomous. It runs the way that the members want it to run. When people talk about roundtables being chapters, I always cringe just a bit because, again, we are not chapters as much as autonomous organizations entirely. We're in the process of putting together a Congress website. The next Congress will be held this fall. We're because of the obvious reasons, we're trying to find out the exact time. We'll be meeting in Northern Virginia, hosted by the George Washington American Revolution Roundtable at Mount Vernon. Anybody who's interested in starting a roundtable, who's a member of a roundtable, is welcome to join. You can contact me through my roundtable's website, the American Revolution Roundtable of Richmond. You just Google us and you'll find us with no problem. So we're excited about the Congress. It's an opportunity for all of us to kind of get together and to further what we're all trying to do, our interest. Roger mentioned the genesis of my involvement in the book about Duportail. One of my topics of interest is the Washington's lieutenants, the generals of the Continental Army. And when I've written about it or spoken about it, I usually try to end my talk with a list of the generals of the Continental Army that I feel are most important, not the best, but the most important. And I always mention Louis Duportail. And just as Roger did, people scratch their head and kind of say, who is this guy? I've never heard of him. So when Roger asked me where a biography was needed, it was quite obvious to me that Duportail was near the top of the list, if not at the top. The only other biography of this man that I'm aware of is Elizabeth Kite's 1933 biography of Duportail. It's probably more a collection of the letters and writings strung together as a biography than a true biography. As an aside, for any of you who may be from New Jersey, I told Roger this the other day. Just by chance, I found out that Elizabeth Kite in 1912 was a researcher involved in a project studying the pine barrens and the piney's of New Jersey. And her work was included in, and you're ready, a study in the heredity of feeble-mindedness that came up with some incredibly inaccurate conclusions about the piney's and the pine barrens. And for a long time, it really was the basis for a lot of people's thinking about the pine barrens. I have no idea how her connection to Duportail and the pines existed, but it was, again, about 20 some years later where her biography came out. So I'm particularly pleased that Norm has had an opportunity to write this. And I want to introduce Norm, and I want to read this introduction because it's very impressive, and I do not want to miss anything. So please bear with me. Norman Desmarais is a professor emeritus at Providence College in Rhode Island and an active reenactor. He is a member of the Le Regiment Bourbonnais, the 2nd Rhode Island Regiment, and the Brigade of the American Revolution. He is the author of the Guide to the American Revolution War series, 6 volumes about the war on land, and 7 volumes about the war at sea and overseas. That's 13 volumes, ladies and gentlemen. He's, as well as America's first ally, France in the American Revolutionary War, and is editor-in-chief of the Brigade Dispatch, the Journal of the American Brigade of the American Revolution. He also translated Gazette Française, the French newspaper published in Newport, Rhode Island by the French fleet that carried the Count de Rochambeau and 5,800 French troops to America in July of 1780. It's the first known service newspaper published by any expeditionary force. Norm was inducted into the American French Genealogical Society French-Canadian Hall of Fame in 2015 and was awarded the Albert Nelson Marquis Lifetime Achievement Award in 2019. His most recent book is America's First Ally, France in the Revolutionary War, and that is this book right here. And Roger will highlight this a bit later. But today we're going to be talking about his 2 forthcoming books, Washington's Engineer, Louis Duportail and the Creation of the Army Corps, and The Road to Yorktown, the French Campaigns in the American Revolution, 1780 to 1783, the Diary of Count Lauberdière, General Rochambeau's nephew and his aide-de-camp. And we're going to begin by talking about the Duportail book. And I'm going to, I guess, ask Norm a series of questions that he'll then be able to expand, elaborate, etc. So Norm, let's begin. I think the first thing we'd like to know probably is what's the role of the military, what was the role of the military engineer in the 18th century, in the armies of the 18th century?
Okay. Thank you very much for that introduction, Bill, and thank you all for joining me tonight. First of all, I want to say that this is very appropriate that we're talking about this topic tonight because March is Francophony month, and coming up on Saturday, Saturday will be Francophonie Day. So tonight we'll be talking about the French in the war. And the importance of the engineers is that today we have various branches of the engineering department, but in the 18th century, they were all combined into one person. So there was a military engineer who would design and develop the fortifications, and he'd build things like forts and structures, earthworks, and so on, to protect the vulnerable points of the battlefield. He created less permanent structures like earthworks and field fortifications to sort of obstruct the enemy and to protect the people who were defending a location. And he also reinforced and strengthened individual houses to make them safe places to gather, such as blockhouses and so on. During a battle, he would also be in charge of artillery. He would design, he would select the type of shot to be used, how much gunpowder they were going to use for the shot, and calculate the distance and the trajectory of to the target. And in addition to that, in sort of non-military time, they would do maps. They'd make maps. And these were particularly important to General Washington because he recognized the importance of cartographers, because he was a surveyor in civilian life, and he could appreciate the value of the military maps. Now, why did one of the first questions that I wanted to address with this book is why did Washington want to get a French general for an engineer? Because the French were always the enemy in most of the colonial wars, and particularly in the French and Indian War, the French were always the enemy. So now he wants to bring them in as an ally, and that was one of the questions I wanted to raise. And one of the things that I learned in the course of my research was that Duportail went to the military school in Mézières, France. Mézières is in northern France, near the Belgian border. And for those of you who are reenactors, the Charleville muskets were made in that area. So the military school was right near the manufacturer of the largest supply of muskets that were used in the largest supply of French muskets that were used in the war. There were two other manufacturers, but they were spread out in other places in France. Now, Bill mentioned Kite's volume. Kite is the only person who has written a biography of Duportail. The reason for that is that there are not very many sources available. The only sources that are the primary sources that are available are mostly at as part of the Washington papers at the Library of Congress. Some of them are spread out at other places, but all the personal papers were inherited by somebody, passed down from one generation to another, until somebody happened to be visiting the home of one of the people who inherited these documents and found in the trash can what looked like an important document. Well, it turns out that this person was using Duportail's papers as a trash can liner. And he realized the value of these things, so he managed to save the few documents that were available and had them transferred to an archive. And those were transferred to the Archives Départementales du Loiret. And they're still very difficult to obtain. At the turn of the century, around the early 21st century, there was a French officer who came from France to as a liaison to West Point. And when he got to West Point, he was an engineer by training, and he did not know that Duportail had been in America and was the actual founder of what became the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So he found Kite's book, basically translated and reworked parts of it. But essentially, his book was a rework of Kite's volume. But since then, there have been other documents that have been discovered, and I've included much of those in this volume. Another thing about Kite's book is that the notes that she used, footnotes, were rather cryptic. So they're sort of hard to locate and obtain copies of. So one of the things that I did with my volume is I've got it thoroughly footnoted. Well, her style of footnoting might have been acceptable 90 years ago. They are not acceptable today. So my footnotes are much more thorough than her notes. Plus, there are a lot more of them. So there's a lot of information that can be gleaned just from the notes in this book. So one of the important things about this guy, Duportail, is that he went to the military school. 10 years after he graduated, he was approached, well, actually, he was recommended by his superiors to the Comte de Saint-Germain. Comte de Saint-Germain was the French Minister of War, and he wanted a manual for engineers. So he got Duportail to write the manual for the engineers. So he approached him in July of 1776, and Duportail began working on this document. Essentially, it was to collect all the knowledge and information that an engineer needed to know. And in the course of writing this document, he made a lot of recommendations for the reorganization of the army. So essentially he had an influence in the reorganization of the entire army, not just the Corps of Engineers. So he finished the document in December, at the end of December of 1776. About this time, Benjamin Franklin was in Paris, and he was looking for engineers, particularly to send to Washington's army. But one of the problems with this is that he was trying to maintain secrecy, because prior to 1778, when the French joined the war, they wanted to provide America with a lot of support, but they wanted to keep it secret so that this would not be interpreted as an act of war by the British and induce the French into a war long before they were prepared for it. So he managed to keep secrecy. Now, one of the things with Benjamin Franklin didn't speak much French at this time, and Duportail did not know English. So he proposed to Benjamin Franklin that in order to keep the secrecy, that they communicate in Latin. But Benjamin Franklin apparently didn't know Latin, so they ended up translating, working in English. But Duportail had to have the communications translated, so or have a translator present while they did the transactions. Well, when he came to, he was one of the first officers to come to America, and in order to maintain secrecy, it was very difficult, because if you gave an officer an order to go to America to work with the American army, that would become known. So what the king did is he authorized Duportail and 3 other officers to go to America. These were the only 4 men that were authorized to come to America by the king. All the others came of their own accord as volunteers or on their own expense. This is a copy of the order that the king issued for Duportail to come to America. And he gave similar orders to the other 3 officers, who were Jean-Baptiste de Gouvillon, Louis de Chez de Lauberdière, and Jean-Baptiste Joseph Chevalier de Laumois. And these 3 men were selected by Duportail to come to America along with him. And they were assigned to different duties while they were here. So this was his orders essentially, but the orders did not say that he was to go to America. It said he was being granted leave to take care of personal business, and that personal business was prearranged to be advisor and an assistant to Washington.
Norm, can I interrupt? We
Yes,
want to get
please.
to your other book too. And one of the advantages of being moderator is I can get to ask some of the questions that I'm particularly interested in. So I would like to hit you with 3 hopefully quick ones.
Okay.
Talk to us a bit about the sappers and miners, what they were, what they did. Also, I've always been fascinated with Duportail's map of Valley Forge, whether it's complete, incomplete, etc. Could you say a few words about that? And also, where did Duportail end up? At the bottom of the ocean or in a grave somewhere?
Okay.
Please, if you could talk about those for a couple minutes when you have an opportunity.
Okay.
I know Duportail recommended Valley Forge as an encampment.
Yes.
Why?
Okay. To answer your first question, what do the sappers and miners do? One of their main duties is to dig trenches. So this is the communication trench at Yorktown. The defenses of Yorktown were completely designed by Duportail, almost solely by him. And this is the communication trench. The readout number 9 is in the background. So this goes from the first parallel to the second parallel, and it's a zigzag trench. The actual trenches were a lot deeper than this. So the sappers and miners their job was to dig trenches like this, and a properly constructed fort would have these stakes sticking out called a fraise, which means a strawberry in French. We talk about raspberries as an insult. Well, these things were called fraise. And the sappers would, their main job when they mount an attack is to cut these devices. They're branches or trunks of trees that are sticking out of the earth. They've got to cut these things under fire and make their way in to let the soldiers into the fort. So they were it was sort of like a suicide squad in this kind of thing. So that was one of their main duties. Another duty that they had was to dig tunnels to undermine different things. We don't have many examples of events like this during the Revolutionary War, but that would be one of their duties, is to dig the mines to put explosives under a powder magazine or barracks or something like that. What was your second question, Bill?
I was curious about his involvement in the selection of Valley Forge as an encampment, and the wonderful map that's attributed to Duportail of the encampment site and the defenses.
Okay. Duportail was significant. He played the major role in the selection of Valley Forge for the winter encampment. One of the main reasons is that this is 20 miles from Philadelphia. The British occupied Philadelphia, and this is 20 miles away. An average daily march for a soldier would be 18 to 20 miles, which means that this would take an army a whole day just to get there, and they would be exhausted by the time they would have to fight. So that's one thing. They're close enough to Philadelphia that they could monitor what was going on in Philadelphia, but far enough away to be not attacked very readily. The design of the fortifications, he developed 4 redoubts. The redoubts are marked here in yellow, and they form a triangle. Philadelphia is down here toward the left side of the slide, and you see Washington's headquarters over here in this area. Duportail's headquarters was down here in this area, just outside of what is now the Valley Forge Park. And it's about 2.5 miles from Washington's headquarters to Duportail's headquarters. And this is on rising ground. So the high ground is up here where this long line is. So the design is that it's a triangle with the point facing Philadelphia. So an attacking army would be coming in this direction from Philadelphia. They'd get here to redoubt number 3, and the artillery park is right here. The artillery park, the current artillery park at Valley Forge is this. So this would be somewhat like the artillery that would be at that artillery park, and the reason it would be down there is that would be the first point of attack, and so this area around redoubt number 3 would be the first point of expected attack. The artillery park is right near there. If it were needed elsewhere, it could easily be brought to other places. Now, one of the things about Valley Forge is that this was sort of just like woodland in the 18th century. And overnight, this became the 3rd largest or the 4th largest city in the colonies after Philadelphia, New York, and Boston. 20,000 men came here, and that made it the largest city. They built a number of huts. They built some 2,000 huts, somewhat like this. Each one of these huts would house 9 to 12 soldiers. So they had to build some 2,000 huts like this. They did that in about a month. So they cut down all the trees in the area, and so that made the area south or east of Philadelphia, west of Valley Forge, totally open. So an approaching army could be seen from miles away, and the defenders could be ready to fight them when they arrived. So this gave them a tremendous advantage. Plus the high ground being in this area, it gave them even further view. So in the springtime, this became all very muddy, and there was a real mess around here. But during the winter, this is the parade ground where von Steuben trained the troops in their tactics and so on. And this defense was so important or so effective that the British never tried to attack it, even though they were only 20 miles away.
Norm, tell us a little bit about the end of Duportail's life, how he avoided the guillotine, and then we'll move on to the second book.
Okay, in 1777, Congress passed a regulation that all officers serving in the American Army swear an oath of allegiance or an oath of loyalty. The French soldiers who were here were allowed to defer until after the declaration of war by France. So Duportail was one of the first French officers to swear that oath of allegiance, and that automatically gave him citizenship. So during the French Revolution, in order to escape the guillotine, he came to America. And when he came to America, he wanted to, now he was an American citizen, so that made it a lot easier for him to get here. And the house that he purchased his old headquarters. What used to be his old headquarters was now his house. This is what is his headquarters. he purchased this and ran a farm in that area. After Napoleon came to power, he passed a regulation that the émigrés, the French officers who escaped France to save their neck, could come back, and they would be treated well, they wouldn't be executed and so on. Well, Duportail was on a ship coming back to France, not intending to go to stay in France. He still had his house here, and apparently he was going to continue business here, but he was going back to France to take care of business, see his family and so on, and intending to come back to Pennsylvania. But he died aboard ship on the way. And of course, since he died aboard ship, there was no place to bury him, so he was buried at sea. One of the things about him is that he kept a low profile while he lived here. He was hardly known. He's hardly known in America, and even less known in France. But he managed to, when they buried him at sea, he's got no grave, no permanent grave, no marker. There are no monuments to celebrate him. The only place that he is celebrated is at the engineering school. I think it's at West Point, where every year on his birthday they have a celebration, and they are the only people who sort of know who Duportail is.
Well, hopefully with your biography, there's going to be a lot more people who know. I had the pleasure of reading the manuscript, folks, and you're going to enjoy it. So I would certainly highly recommend it to you. But now let's talk about the road to Yorktown, the French campaigns and the American Revolution, and that's really a translation of a diary. So tell us a little bit about how this compares with other diaries. What particular problems you ran into? What did you learn from doing this diary?
Well, the French stayed in Newport for a whole year before going to Yorktown. And being a Rhode Islander, I was particularly interested in his observations about Newport. I also learned that he has a lot more detail about the route from Newport to Yorktown than most of the other diarists have. A lot of the stuff that the other diarists he includes, but often he provides more detail. One of the important things is that he is Rochambeau's nephew and aide-de-camp. He was Rochambeau's youngest aide-de-camp. Rochambeau's son was the next youngest aide-de-camp. So he has a unique perspective on the war, and he has some interesting things that other people don't have in their diaries, or that he has a different slant on the events that the other diarists have. One of the things he talks about is New Year's customs. He was very surprised at the American customs for New Year's, and so were the Newporters, seeing the French embracing each other on New Year's Day. So he talks very much about that. I think he has a lot more detail about the Lippincott affair than other diarists have. One of the things, one of the most interesting things that I found is that all the diarists talk about the landing, the landing of the French in Newport. Now, most of the diarists say that people expect that the French landed here at Kings Park in Newport. Actually, they landed over here at Woods Castle, which is now Secundit Point, and that's whoops.
You're going to have to share again, Norm. I stopped the sharing.
Oh, okay. Okay, so Kings Park is over here. This is the city of Newport. They landed over here at Woods Castle. And the reason I say that is I'm trying to enlarge this map, but it won't enlarge. Anyway, this note down here indicates the landing site. So he landed in this cove, and he doesn't actually say that the French landed there at the time they landed. It's only in October when the French are bored and have nothing to do. General Rochambeau decides to have the soldiers play war games, and he says that they're going to do it at Woods Castle, and he says this is 5 miles from where the French camp was. Well, the French camp is over here, right in this area, and it's exactly 5 miles from here to Woods Castle. And if you couple this with Rochambeau's order book, Rochambeau indicates that every day of the French occupation in Newport, they had a guard of 90 men here at Woods Castle. And so that becomes very important for that.
Norm, excuse me. We see a dictation box on your.
Yes, I'm trying to get rid of that.
Yeah, you just hit cancel, I think, in the dictation box there.
There we go. Yeah.
Okay. So
It's back, Norm. Norm, we want to have an opportunity to let the audience ask a few questions. Can you quickly tell us the interesting story about the attempt to arrest General Rochambeau?
yes, the Count de Lauberdière was staying at this mill. The mill had been totally destroyed by the British when they were going through Prompton, New York. Now, on the way back from Yorktown, the French spent a month at Compton. And
I've stopped the sharing again, Norm.
okay, yeah, I wanted. Okay, can we cancel the share screen?
Yeah, I've done that.
Okay, so.
Maybe we can go to some questions, Bill.
So anyway, this guy shows up at night, very late at night, and Lauberdière says, "Well, here you can sleep with us." They were all sleeping on the floor in the mill, and the following morning, he finds out that that person is no longer there.
Awesome.
And we hope Norm comes back. He's no longer there. There he is.
I'm trying to cancel that dictation. So anyway, the office. Damn it.
It's okay, Norm. We can't see it anymore. I've stopped the screen sharing. So.
Okay. Well, this may be independent of the screen showing.
Well, I think you're good. If you tell us the Rochambeau story, then we'll try to get a few questions in if we can.
Okay. So anyway, the following morning, this guy has disappeared, and they find him out with the miller out in the property, and it turns out that Rochambeau's having breakfast. As he's ready to mount his horse, the guy who was sleeping on the floor with them that night turns out to be the local sheriff. He puts his hand on Rochambeau's shoulder and tells him he's under arrest. And he wants to know why. And he says, for the destruction of property. Well, the French had dug the trench to the nearest water supply for the mill. That was a quarter of a mile away. They repaired his mill to make it productive. They repaired a lot of the damage on the property. And now he's claiming that they destroyed fences and destroyed other property, and he wants to arrest them. And I've compared this with 5 other diaries, and everybody's got a different slant on it. Some talk about Rochambeau being a law-abiding citizen, and he wants to do right by the miller and all this stuff. And the others will say how indignant they are, and the officers are drawing their sword and saying, well, the Rochambeau turns to the sheriff and says, do you realize the precedent you're setting trying to arrest a general in the midst of his army? He's like, I could have these 5,000 men on your back immediately. He was all alone with the miller.
Is there still a warrant in Rhode Island for Rochambeau?
Rochambeau established a committee of people to assess the damage, and they found that they came back with their recommendation, and they said the miller was he was demanding 3 times as much as what the property, the damage was worth. So Rochambeau paid him half. He said the fair value plus goodwill, and the rest is overcharged. We're not going to pay it.
Well, we have 5 minutes or so for a few questions from the audience, and I would pose the questions to both you, Norm, and to Bob Selig. One of them comes in and says, can you talk about and list some of the locations of supply centers and military docks in the Caribbean and in France? That may be pretty broad. And he also would like to know how many soldiers, sailors, and ships served during the American Revolution. Again, that's pretty broad. I'm not sure if they're talking simply about French soldiers, sailors, etc. But gentlemen, some thoughts if you can, please. Bob, if you want to start, we'll give Norm a break.
Okay, I can do that. Supply depots was the first question.
Yes, sir.
Both on the continent as well as the West Indies. For the Yorktown campaign, there are the traditional supply depots, which the Continental Army had, which also were used by the French, primarily Fishkill Supply Depot, obviously the largest supply depot in the Mid-Atlantic states. But then on the way to Yorktown, since all of that had to be done with a certain amount of secrecy to deceive Sir Henry Clinton into thinking that New York was the intended target of attack, these supply depots were really only on the fly. And we have for the Continental Army, for example, orders that the people in Trenton, for example, have to loan their bake oven to the Continental Army so they can bake bread. So there really is no well-established supply depot system all the way down to Yorktown. I mean, there's cattle that accompanies the troops in Baltimore. They're slaughtering about 800 cattle, I want to say, over 2 or 3 days. So it's just not there. In the West Indies, the main French depot is what in Guadeloupe and Saint-Domingue, modern day Haiti, where they have their supply depots. But that's really all I know. As long as we focus on 1781, both the Continental Army as well as French, once they get out of New York City, it's very much on the fly situation.
Okay, thank you both. We're getting down to the last few minutes before we have to switch over to Roger, and I want to propose 2 questions to Norm that I find to be very interesting. One, what role did Duportail play in the Middlebrook encampment of 1778, 1779, and equally, can you compare the engineering contributions of Duportail versus that of Kosciuszko to the American cause? Who contributed more to the American cause and why? That's a dangerous question, but perhaps Norm, you would like to try to take a shot at it.
To tell you the truth, I don't know. I would say that Duportail is the more important of the officers because he was the one who founded the Corps of Sappers and Miners, which became the Corps of Engineers. And he was the one who advocated for all of his officers. One of his things, every so often, he would request Congress or Washington for promotions and increase in pay for his officers.
How about Middlebrook? I lived very close to that for 35 years. I'm curious, and I don't remember reading about his role in the Middlebrook encampment.
I don't think I covered that in my book.
Okay. And if I remember right, that encampment was not fortified in the same way Valley Forge was. It was not nearly as close to the British in New York City. So I don't think the fortifications were quite as necessary. Plus the Watchung Mountains were there. If they needed to, as often Washington did, he could hightail right up the mountain and be in a good position right there to defend himself as need be. Gentlemen, we're down to the last few minutes. Do either of you have a closing statement to make?
One of the things about Lauberdière's book is that he had a very good penmanship, which indicated he was very well educated, and it was very easy reading. It did not present a lot of the difficulties of translation that other documents like Rochambeau's order book or muster rolls have.
Well, what I would like to say is that Duportail and Norm tried to point this out. Duportail really belonged to the innermost circle of Washington's aides. Just one example, when the news comes from Admiral de Grasse on the 14th of August that he's sailing to New York City rather than to sailing to the Chesapeake rather than to New York City. Duportail is one of the 4 or 5 officers who are actually there during the debate. Lauberdière is the other one. So he is one of those who participates in this discussion in the crucial decision to deploy to Virginia, actually. And so he's one of 5 or 6 people who know about this, and the rest of the army is in the dark until well halfway across New Jersey. Senator Clinton knows 2 days later, but I don't know how you found out. But that's covered in Norm's book on page 1465, 165, where you have a quote by Duportail saying, in view of the news we had yesterday, which means he knows about de Grasse's letter, when there are literally half a dozen people. That's how important he really is to Washington's staff.
But we have mustard named after Kosciuszko and nothing named after Duportail, unfortunately.
No.
How about some cheese?
And Kosciuszko did not get along with the French. In fact, when the French were going to inspect the defenses at West Point, Kosciuszko was gone. He made a deliberate attempt to be gone.
One of my favorite quotes from Duportail, and I will not get it accurate, but to paraphrase is, he said something to the effect that there's more enthusiasm for the American Revolution in every cafe in France than there is in the United States. Was that fairly accurate? Does that ring a bell?
That is word for word from one of his letters to the Comte de Saint-Germain.
Okay.
And he wrote that a week after he was promoted to Brigadier General. And if you go to the end of that letter, he talks about giving French aid to America, and says, don't give too much too quickly. He says the Americans would prefer to make peace with their brethren in the British than to fight with the French.
Yeah. And those of you who, if you ever want to follow the W3O, the Washington Rochambeau route, buy Norm's book on Lauberdière. It's almost a tour guide, not just of the route itself, the main route that the armies march, but also a number of side trails, because he is one of the couriers as the aide-de-camp that Rochambeau sends to all kinds of letters and notes across New Jersey and New York. It could serve as almost as a tour guide for the Washington Rochambeau route.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. Roger, I think we're pretty much ready to send it back to you, are we not?
We are indeed. This show certainly pointed out that there are still so many uncovered stories in the American Revolution, and I am proud to have been a part of this project as Norm's literary agent on this book that has just been published by Prometheus. And his second book, which is published by Savas Beatty, and both are available at the website link that I provided during the show, and it will also be on the past shows tab at historyauthortalks.com. So you'll be able to go to historyauthortalks.com and you'll see a recording. If you were not able to see this entire show, you can see the recording of the entire show, along with links on how to get in touch with Norm and Bill and the Congress of the American Revolutionary War Roundtables, and to Robert Selig, who I thank you all for adding so much to historyauthortalks.com. Next week, on the 23rd, at the same time, set from 7 till 8, we have the Calamitous Campaign and Complete Victory, Gentleman Johnny's Journey to Gates and to the Gates of Defeat. See what I did there? Gates of Defeat, you get it? So, and that includes Dr. Kevin Weddle, professor of military theory and strategy at the U.S. Army War College, who has just published the book, The Complete Victory. We also have Doug Cubison, who is the author of Burgoyne and the Saratoga Campaign. It's a collection of Burgoyne's papers. Our partner in history is himself an author, is Eric Schnitzer, who many of you know, who is the park ranger and historian at the Saratoga National Battlefield and the author of Road to Saratoga, and that's next week. The following week, I am very pleased to have my friend and author, David O. Stewart, who has just written an absolutely magnificent new biography of George Washington. You know, I have to tell you, when David said he's written a new biography, he was writing a biography of George Washington, I thought, oh gosh, another one? But you know what? This is just so lively. I love David's writing, and this is his best book yet. It's just, you must read David's new book. So you should join us for George Washington and the founding political character. And that is on March 30th. David is going to be joined by Lindsay Travinsky, who's going to be doing an encore presentation of her book, The Cabinet, the Founding of an American Institution. And our partner in history is going to be Mount Vernon, appropriately enough. So those are the next few shows we have coming up. I've run a couple of minutes over. Again, my thanks to my authors and to Bill, and of course, always to all of you for joining us this evening. Thank you very much, everybody. Good night.
Thank you, Roger.
Good night. Thank you, Roger.
Excellent.